Female serial killers are rare. In fact, Hunting Humans, an encyclopedia of modern serial killers, found that 85% of all known serial killers were male. Still, female murderers do exist, but often their motives are very different. Many women will kill people that they know, loved ones, relatives, even children. One of these women is Martha Ann Johnson, who is believed to be responsible for the deaths of her 4 children. Martha Ann Johnson was born in 1955 in Georgia. By the time she was 22 years old, Martha had already been married 3 times and had 2 children from previous relationships. Jenny Ann Wright, born in 1971, and James William Taylor, born in 1975. The children lived together with Martha and her 3rd husband, Earl Bowen. Imagine being 22 years old, being married 3 times by that point, and already having 2 children. Holy hell. But this was kind of normal back then in the 70s. You know, people had children a lot earlier. I saw some statistic that said that the normal marrying age back in the 70s and the 60s was 21 years old, which makes sense because my parents got married at 21 years old. Around September 1977, Martha and Earl had some kind of dispute, and as a result, Earl walked out of the family home. Shortly after, on September 23rd, 2-year-old James was rushed to the hospital after Martha had found him unresponsive after a nap. Unfortunately, the little boy was soon pronounced dead, and the doctors ruled his cause of death as sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. SIDS is often called crib death, as most infants who die because of it have been sleeping prior to their deaths. SIDS is unpredictable, sudden, and inexplicable, making it so frightening. However, SIDS mostly caused the deaths of babies between 1 month to 1-year-old. James was already way over that scale. Nevertheless, after the tragedy, Earl returned home and he and Martha reconciled. The couple had 2 additional children, Earl Wayne Jr., born in 1979, and Tabitha Janelle, born in 1980. Soon after the birth of Tabitha, history repeated itself. Earl left Martha once again, and on November 30th, 1980, she claimed to have found her 3-month-old Tabitha not breathing and looking blue as she went to wake her up from a nap. Paramedics arrived soon after, but there was nothing that they could have done to save the little girl. Again, the death was ruled as SIDS. Now, understandably, Earl was feeling a little suspicious at this point, but still he returned home. However, within a couple of months, Earl and Martha were fighting again. Following his father leaving the family home, 2-year-old Earl Jr. was found with a package of rat poison, and he was taken to the hospital immediately. He was treated and returned home, but apparently began to suffer from seizures. On February 12, 1981, Earl had one of his seizures and was taken to the hospital but went into cardiac arrest on the way. Doctors were able to revive the 2-year-old and he was put on life support, but unfortunately, Earl's brain had suffered too much in the process and he was pronounced dead and removed from life support 3 days later. At this point, Jenny Ann, who must have been terrified as her brothers and sisters were dying one by one, allegedly told social services that she was afraid of her mother. But unfortunately, nobody seemed to listen to Jenny Ann. At the beginning of 1982, Martha claimed to doctors that 11-year-old Jenny Ann was complaining of chest pains. She was given a prescription of Tylenol and a rib belt. But then, on February 21st, 1982, Jenny Ann was found face down on Martha's bed with foam coming out of her mouth. Paramedics were unable to revive her, and the autopsy revealed that Jenny Ann had died of asphyxia. So at this point, all 4 children of Martha Johnson had died in questionable conditions. Still, it would take a long time before no one took a second look at the strange deaths. Meanwhile, Martha separated from Earl for good and married her fourth husband. Almost 7 years later, in December of 1988, the Atlanta Constitution published an article questioning the deaths of the 4 children of Martha Ann Johnson, and as a result, the case was reopened. It was now noticed that each child had died between 7 and 10 days after Martha and Earl had marital issues. Finally, more than 10 years after James' death, Martha was arrested on July 3rd, 1989. It didn't take long for her to confess that she had killed her children, not Sid's. According to Martha's confession, she had smothered both Jenny Ann and James by sitting on them as they slept. Back then, Martha weighed more than 250 pounds. And as you can guess, her motive was simply to punish her husband and reunite with him. However, Martha denied that she had anything to do with the deaths of her younger children. The trial began in April of 1990. By that time, Martha had changed her mind and recanted the confession. Her defense tried to paint the best picture of a good wife and a mother who could never hurt her children, but the jurors didn't buy it. On May 5th, Martha Ann Johnson was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Jenny Ann. She was sentenced to life in prison with a chance of parole in 7 years, which was reduced to 6 years after an appeal. Martha was never charged in Tabitha, Earl, and James' deaths. Martha was housed at Pulaski State Prison and was denied parole for the first time in 1996. During the years, Martha had been unsuccessful at getting parole about 5 times, but in 2020, things changed. Despite her former husband Shane Wright speaking passionately against her case release, saying, "I want them to carry her body in a bag out of that prison, throw her in the woods, and catch her on fire. I wouldn't even waste the dirt." That's some hatred right there. That is some serious hatred right there. But Martha was eventually granted parole, and today, she's a free woman at the age of 67 after 30 years behind bars. Fortunately, something was learned from this case. In the 1990s, the revelation of Martha's crimes initiated a trend in which authorities looked more closely into the sudden and unexplained deaths of young children. Since then, numerous doctors have said that SIDS has been misdiagnosed so many times. While it's easier to blame SIDS, which is the leading cause of death between children 1 and a month, than believe their own parents could be responsible for their death, every single case should be looked into carefully and was. That can be the difference between one dead child versus several dead children.